My name is Maria Dalton. I'm going to be 27 this year. I've been married for 5 years and have a son named Martin who just turned 4. At first, I worked full-time after getting married, but now I work part-time at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. I fell in love with Kevin Carlton's romantic gestures, which led us to date and eventually get married. But after we got married, Kevin, who used to be kind, started acting more controlling. Kevin has a younger sister named Jane Dalton, who is 20 years old. Kevin spoils her a lot, maybe because they have a big age gap. Before we got married, I didn't really have a problem with this and thought that Kevin and Jane got along well. After we got married, I started noticing some changes in Jane's behavior. She often comes over to our house, and every time she does, I feel like I have to do everything for her because Kevin always gives in to her selfish requests. Jane shows up at our place without warning, whether it's morning or night. And when she does, she never brings any gifts or shows any appreciation. She acts like I don't even exist, only talking to Kevin, saying stuff like, "Hey, brother, I'm here again." Then Kevin, seeing that there's only enough dinner for 3 people, asks Jane if she wants to eat. Naturally, I didn't plan to cook for her. When I try to tell Kevin quietly that I didn't make dinner for Jane, he just brushes it off and tells me to deal with it because his sister is here. So, in the end, I end up giving my portion of dinner to Jane. And then, loud enough for Jane to hear, Kevin blames me, saying things like, "You should have made more food." When Jane hears this, she looks like she's about to cry and apologizes to me. Kevin comforts her and scolds me, saying things like, "You're not being considerate," or "Don't be mean to my sister," even though Jane says sorry every time. I notice that Jane seems happier when Kevin pays more attention to her than he does to me. It's like she enjoys it. I fixed myself a meal from leftovers in the fridge, thinking I'll eat with Kevin and Jane and our son Martin. But just as I'm about to start, Jane tells Kevin she wants to talk to him alone. "Martin, you eat with your mom," Kevin says, moving us to another room. This isn't the first time he's done this. After Martin and I finish eating and go to clean up, I find Kevin and Jane chatting happily on the sofa. Their dishes are still on the table, untouched. They never bother to clean up. I feel like they see me more as a maid than a wife or sister-in-law. They don't talk to Martin either, as if he's just a maid's child brought to work. I start cleaning up in the kitchen and am about to give Martin a bath when Kevin calls me loudly. It's nearly 8 p.m., but he says, "Jane wants cake. Go buy it now. Get it from the shop near the station," he adds, specifying where. Going to the cake shop will delay Martin's bedtime, but when I hesitate, Jane says to Kevin, "I want it now," and Kevin rushes me, saying, "It's okay if he sleeps late today." What's with that attitude when Jane is here? Kevin starts loudly blaming me. I know I'll have to go to the cake shop, so I reluctantly decide to go. The shop near the station closes at 9 p.m., so if I hurry, I can make it. As I'm getting ready, I overhear Kevin and Jane talking loudly. They say things like, "She's so inconsiderate," and "Why did you marry her?" I can't leave Martin behind, so I take him with me. As I'm getting him ready, I hear Kevin's loud voice from the living room saying, "If you defy me again, we'll get a divorce." Martin can hear it too. He might not understand the words, but I think he knows his parents are fighting. Holding back my emotions, I ask Martin, "What kind of cake would you like?" He brightens up, saying, "Mom, I want a cake with lots of fruits." So Martin and I chatted happily about cakes on our way to the cake shop, forgetting about Kevin's earlier words. We made it just before closing time, and luckily, they had the cake Jane wanted. We bought 2 cakes, plus the fruit-loaded one Martin wanted. Back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin, then prepared Martin's cake and took it to the dining room. But as soon as I set it down in front of Martin, Jane pointed to it and said she wanted that one instead. Before I could say anything, Kevin moved Martin's cake in front of Jane, ignoring Martin's protests, and let her eat it. He said, "I bought that cake with my money, so I get to choose," which made me really upset. I couldn't hold it in anymore and voiced my frustration to Kevin and Jane. Kevin then threatened with divorce. Martin stopped crying but held my hand tightly, looking worried. Then, after some thought, he said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries on it. It's really delicious," referring to the cake Jane initially wanted. I felt like I was making Martin endure too much. There were 3 adults, including me, making a 4-year-old put up with this. Seeing Jane reach for Martin's cake after he said how yummy it was made me take him to the next room so he could eat it in peace. Kevin apologized to Jane, saying sorry for being stingy, and I wanted to argue, but I held back, not wanting Martin to hear about divorce. Watching Martin happily eat his cake was a relief. After finishing, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, Jane had already left. As I was about to wake up Kevin and Martin and prepare breakfast, I heard Martin crying and rushed to him. Shockingly, Martin's piggy bank, given by my father, was broken, and all his saved-up money was gone. He'd always said goodnight to it before sleeping, just like he did last night. At that time, the only people in the living room were Kevin and Jane. Asked Kevin about the piggy bank, and he said indifferently that Jane needed some money, so she took it from there. As I held Martin, crying and shaking, I felt his pain so deeply that I cried with him. It hurt to see Kevin care more about his sister than our son. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. "Why are you making the mornings so tense?" "I feel terrible," Kevin exclaimed. "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much for the first time since our marriage." I expressed my anger towards him. I had always been careful not to argue in front of Martin, but I couldn't stay silent seeing him upset like this. Feeling hurt and shocked by Kevin's sudden actions, I watched as he handed me divorce papers and left the house with a loud bang. Martin, who had never cried over the issues with Kevin and Jane before, must have reached his limit. He had been crying since last night. Unable to bear seeing Martin so upset, I suggested we skip daycare for the day. Martin seemed happy to be with me and eagerly agreed. We spent the day playing together. Martin brought a picture book from the shelf, sat on my lap, and happily remarked that I was the teacher at nursery today, looking like an angel. His little heart must be full of patience. I decided to take the day off work to be with him, despite causing trouble at my workplace. When I explained the situation, they kindly granted me a day off, urging me to play a lot with Martin. In the morning, we went to the park, played games, and had fun on the playground equipment. When we got home and had lunch, Martin seemed tired and fell asleep on my lap, just like when he was a baby. Instead of doing household chores, I decided to cherish this moment and be healed by his peaceful sleeping face and breathing. As I dozed off, I was startled by a noise from the entrance. It wasn't time for Kevin to come home yet, so I became suspicious. Quickly grabbed Martin and hid in the bedroom closet, taking only my bag with valuables. I heard someone enter the house and search for something. It turned out to be Jane's voice. She seemed to be searching for something and made a phone call to Kevin, mentioning searching for something. I wondered if it could be one of my belongings they were looking for. Feeling unsettled by Kevin's behavior and Jane's unexpected intrusion into our home, I quickly packed essentials for Martin and myself. When Martin woke up, suggested we visit Grandpa's place. We headed to the station and took a train to my parents' house, which is conveniently just 2 stations away. Arriving unannounced, my parents welcomed us warmly, sensing something was wrong just by looking at my face. Martin immediately started playing with their pet dog, which helped me relax a bit. I recounted everything that happened with Kevin and Jane, explaining that I felt scared to stay at our house. My mother speculated that Jane might have been looking for my belongings, possibly my cash cards. It reminded me of my situation. I'm still the CEO of a successful online shop for handmade goods, but Kevin doesn't know. He thinks I've stepped down and only receive help from the company. I've kept this from Kevin because he's bad with money and only gives me a small amount for food expenses each month. He once suggested I quit my job and become a full-time housewife, but I refused. Eventually, he agreed to let me work part-time, but made me sign a post-marital property waiver to prevent me from considering divorce. Since Martin was born, I've struggled financially, using my savings for his nursery fees and clothes. I've never asked Kevin for more money beyond our agreed food budget. It seems like Jane and Kevin might be desperate for money, especially if they're searching for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account for Martin where a portion of my salary goes each month. But it's clear they won't find anything because I always carry my valuables with me. To be safe, my father suggested keeping my valuables at their house in their safe. It's concerning that Jane might have access to our house even when we're not there, and Kevin might be allowing it. Martin came to my father crying, explaining that his piggy bank was broken and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father became angry and decided to call Kevin. But my mother advised against it, saying we should calmly find out their purpose first to prevent them from making excuses later. We decided to record their conversation to find out their intentions. My parents consulted a lawyer friend, and we returned home. While I was cooking dinner, Kevin came home and immediately asked me about my cash cards. When I questioned him, he gave vague answers. Then he demanded all my part-time money for his sister. When I refused, he became angry and pushed divorce papers toward me, saying hurtful things about Martin and valuing Jane over him. I silently packed, took Martin, and left. Kevin insisted on divorce, but I couldn't go back to a house where my sister-in-law was treated like family while Martin and I were pushed aside. Kevin bombarded me with messages and calls, but I ignored them and went to my parents' house. I played them the recording and showed them the divorce papers. They advised me to do what's best for Martin, even if it means divorcing Kevin. But I fear that might hurt Martin too. While struggling with this decision, Martin said he was hungry, and my mother made him his favorite dish, hamburgers. Seeing her kindness toward Martin brought tears to my eyes. She said she prepared the hamburgers so that Martin and I could visit them anytime. After taking a bite of the hamburger, Martin exclaimed with a big smile, "Grandma's hamburger is so good. I want to eat it every day." He said this to my mother with joy in his eyes. I replied, "That's because this hamburger contains my love for you, Martin," as he took another big bite and offered some to me. Touched by his kindness, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. My father reassured Martin, "Mommy is crying because she's so happy that you gave her this hamburger. These are happy tears, not sad ones." Martin smiled, understanding. He then said something that made my heart ache. "This hamburger is so delicious. If Jane were here, she would have eaten it." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears and hugged him tightly. Seeing this, my father's eyes turned red. I told Martin, "It's a blessing to be with family, isn't it?" He looked surprised and asked, "Isn't Dad saying that only Jane is family? Is my family just Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma?" My father gently replied, "Yes, that's right." He then asked Martin if he wanted to live with us as a family, to which Martin replied with a laugh, "Of course. We're family." This brought smiles to everyone's faces. Despite considering divorce, this meal filled me with such happiness that I decided to part ways with Kevin and tell Martin about it. Although it was a heavy topic, Martin seemed to understand and happily agreed to live as a family. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, bringing comfort with their faint laughter. I lay in bed with my mother, reminiscing about my childhood, feeling at peace. The next day, I turned on my phone to find over 200 calls and messages from Kevin, showing his emotional instability. It exhausted me, so I turned off my phone again. Today, I discussed with a lawyer and formalized my intention to divorce. The lawyer will meet with Kevin tomorrow. Later, the lawyer explained that Jane had accumulated a significant debt from the casino and shopping addiction, and Kevin had acted as her guarantor. When Jane couldn't pay her debts, they decided to use my savings to help. Now, Kevin wants me and Martin back and doesn't want to divorce me. The lawyer said the divorce papers I gave had already been submitted, and when asked if this meant the divorce was accepted, the lawyer confirmed yes, it was. Kevin seemed sad, saying he doesn't want another man to have me. But knowing everything was finalized gave me peace of mind. I expected arguments about child support, but he agreed to pay $340 every month for Martin. Later, Kevin called me. His tone was calm, unlike before. He admitted he thought keeping me financially dependent would stop me from divorcing him. He also confessed to spoiling his sister Jane, thinking it was showing sibling love. He wasn't ignoring Martin, but he felt jealous of him for having my attention. He asked me not to remarry until he settled Jane's debts, but I told him firmly that I didn't love him anymore and wouldn't reconsider. I could hear him crying softly before he said, "Please be happy," and hung up. I talked with my parents about our future and decided to stay with them till Martin grows up. He also transferred to a different nursery. I resumed my role as the company president after explaining everything to my coworkers. Later, I heard that Kevin and Jane told their parents about the divorce and their debts, which led to them being disowned. Their parents were more upset about not seeing their grandson again than the debt. Now, Kevin and Jane live in a small, old apartment, always blaming each other. They brought this upon themselves. Today, I'm happy being with my family,